the most powerful form of Islam in Pakistan and Bangladesh, which is where most of our Muslims come from. Similarly, there's radical strands in the Shia religion, based fundamentally in Iran, which again, over the last 20, 30 years, have come to the fore. It's a common pattern. The other common pattern, in terms of a deliberate plan, is nothing to do with what the Muslims have done or wanted at all. It's the actions of the European elite. And just as America and Canada and Mexico are gradually, and against the wishes or even the knowledge of the American people, being pushed into a federal union, then of course it's a more advanced thing has happened in Europe with what's now called the European Union, which is going to become a federal superstate, modelled to an extent on the United States of America. And the people behind this, particularly the French elite, have a long, long history of wanting to build an empire involving the Arab world. And what they've been trying to do has been best described by a Jewish researcher, Bat Yaor, who's well worth looking up. She wrote a book in 2005, Eurabia, and she's traced the development of this. And I'd like to read you just two short paragraphs from Bat Yaor's own work, talking about the establishment of the Euro-Arab dialogue in July 1974 in Paris. And here, Bat Yaor explains what the Euro-Arab dialogue is about. The field of Euro-Arab collaboration covered every domain, from economy and policy to immigration. In foreign policy, it backed anti-Americanism, anti-Zionism, and Israel's delegitimization, the promotion of the PLO and Arafat, a Euro-Arab associative diplomacy in international forums, and NGO collaboration. In domestic policy, the EAD established close cooperation between the Arab and European media, television, radio, journalists, publishing houses, academia, cultural centres, school textbooks, student and youth organisations, and tourism. Eurabia is therefore this strong Euro-Arab network of associations, a comprehensive symbiosis with cooperation and partnership on policy, economy, demography and culture. Eurabia is the future of Europe. Where did this come from? Bat Yaor again explains that, because she's traced it back. It has strong antecedents in the French 19th century dream of governing an Arab empire and the exploitation of anti-Semitism to strengthen Arab-Muslim-French solidarity against a demonized common enemy. Eurabia is not only a web of various agreements covering every field, it is essentially a political project for a total demographic and cultural symbiosis between Europe and the Arab world, where Israel will eventually dissolve. America would be isolated and challenged by an emerging Euro-Arab continent that is linked to the whole Muslim world and invested with tremendous political and economic power in international affairs. That's really what it's about. People who would say, oh, you're just blaming the Muslims. No, it's not a question of that. There's traitors within our gates who are the ones who have opened the door to this thing, and by bringing in Muslims who, in many cases, just think they're there for a better life in the West, they're actually being turned into pawns in this very sordid international power game. There are further reasons, though, why it is happening, coming back to what some Muslims do. In 1989, Salman Rushdie wrote a not very good book, as a matter of fact, entitled The Satanic Verses, which earned him a fatwa from the leader of the Iranian Revolution, a Shia, which produced in Bradford, one of Britain's main northern cities, 20,000 Sunni Muslims, primarily, demonstrating and calling for the immediate murder of Salman Rushdie, who promptly went into hiding at enormous expense to the British taxpayer, and partly because the British government didn't say, no, this is unacceptable in the West. If you want to live in the West, then certain things such as freedom of speech, the freedom of authors to write things which offend, those are sacrosanct to our ways, and if you don't like it, you must leave. The moment that wasn't done, it gave a green light to the more extreme elements within Islam to push more and more, and so that the moderate elements within it feel dragged along by it as well. It's, I won't say culminated, because we're only in the early stages yet, but you'll remember probably in 2004, Theo van Gogh, the French filmmaker, who was shot more than 20 times, had his throat cut and a dagger shoved through his heart, with a very literate series of letters from a formerly criminal, now radicalized, committed young Muslim, a second or third generation Dutch Muslim. In the same year, the Danes started to say, well, we need a degree of integration here if this isn't in the end to end in civil war. And the integration minister, who made comments to that effect, had her house and car burnt out in firebombs, very nearly killing herself and her family. This intimidation happens at every level. You find it anywhere, literally anywhere in Europe where there is a significant Islamic population. You find young school children of any other community picked on, bullied, spat upon, beaten at school. And it goes right up to higher levels. In Bradford several years ago, there was an Islamic riot which cost £20 million, $40 million worth of damage in 2 nights. As a result of which, in huge areas of the north of England, the police know that they simply don't go into certain areas, because if they do, it could kick off that level of trouble. In 2004 also, another example. This is the more extreme example, obviously, but it only takes a few extreme examples to make everyone else think, well, I shall keep my head down. I shall keep out of this. That's the point about intimidation. It's not about usually using violence against large numbers of people. It's using targeted violence. In 2004, a Jewish disc jockey in Paris had his throat slit, his eyes gouged out, his face mutilated with a fork, and his Arab Muslim killer, when arrested, said, and I quote, "I've killed my Jew, I will go to heaven," unquote. And so the problem isn't just that attitude, which is Quranically inspired. The problem is that the French media, the mainstream media, didn't report the murder or the motive. And again, this is the thing which, if you have any extreme section in one group, when the other group constantly gives way to that kind of thing, then the extremists grow not only in confidence, but also in prestige. And it's largely a matter of this elite surrender by our own masters, ruling class, and so on, which is the problem. What's the reason for that? It's several-fold. It's partly fear. More important, I would say, you'll be familiar with the same thing in America, but believe me, it's 10 times worse in Europe. The Frankfurt School's culture of critique, the 1930s initially Marxist decision to undermine Western society by constantly critiquing, criticizing, attacking all its core values, all its traditions, everything that gives it stability and weight. Attack everything, whether it's the church, whether it's the army, whether it's freedom of speech, whether it's bourgeois liberal values, whatever it is. Constantly attack them and wear them down. And this was imported from Frankfurt in 1933 over to New York, and then washed back, particularly in the 1968 failed student revolutions. And this, bear in mind, is where, certainly in Western Europe, this is where our current leadership class comes from. Almost without exception, they are all from this 1968 revolutionary cadre, who, now they're on a very, very good salary, don't want to share their wages with the workers anymore, but nevertheless still have this fundamental cultural antipathy towards traditional Western values. And these people have undermined from within our people's confidence in our own culture, in our own traditions, in our right to say, no, this is our land, and our ways are what should be preserved here. And it's a very, very core part of the problem. The elite surrender manifests itself in other ways. Every time there have been serious problems with this radicalized section of a radical community, instead of the elite saying, now we must do something about it, they say, now we must do something to stop the European natives complaining about it. So one of the key results of the 2005 bombings in Britain was that the government said, well, we believe this is because these poor people are angered by discrimination against them and by people inciting hatred against Islam. So if we stop people criticizing Islam, perhaps they won't bomb us anymore. In the 1930s, it was called appeasement. And that's precisely what it is. I'll give you just a few, or 6 very brief examples of the elite surrender, just to give you a flavour of it.